Catherine Ham, Brian Wilson, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you. The Morning Majority, 6:30.
WMAL.
It's 7:07. And Brian, I understand you took the 100-degree weekend as a chance to just go to a stark, sunshiny, hot theme park.
Amusement park, yes.
Right.
I mean, yesterday I took my daughter out to Six Flags America, and now I have a whole nother list of things, whole nother list of reasons why I don't like Daniel Snyder.
Like the $8 water?
Chicken strip basket, and some fries, $31. I kid you not.
Well, I mean,
that's more than you would pay if you went to FedEx Field. Wait. He's in charge of both of those things. Interesting, isn't it?
Well, I was up in northern Michigan. There was a breeze. There was no air conditioning in any of the houses, and we slept fine.
Yes.
I was there for my sister-in-law's wedding. I was recently married. His sister then got married later in the summer. So it was a busy summer for both families. And I unplugged a little bit, even though the news was really big. And now I have to say, I was married on Bin Laden weekend.
Oh, wow.
She was married on debt ceiling weekend. And my little brother's getting married next April. So something big's going to happen. I'm just, But when you got a new family, you got to unplug and really spend time with them. And so I had a really pleasant weekend not thinking about the debt ceiling.
And you mentioned earlier that people didn't ask you. They weren't all that interested in it.
And they usually
right?
do ask me about stuff. I'm trying to escape, and I get a bunch of questions. But I did get to check out a bit, and it was great.
Good.
But right now we've got Joe DiGenova. And how's it going, Joe?
It's going beautifully up here on Lake Champlain.
See, he's up north, too.
75 during the day, 60 at night.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
See, we never went up north when I was a kid, and so it's a new thing for me to be somewhere in August and not be burning up.
Yeah, it's beautiful in Michigan.
So I'm curious, Jill, before we move on to some of the other topics, what do you think about this deal?
Well, I think as much as the Tea Party people don't want to admit it, this is a great victory for them. They changed the conversation. The editorial in the New York Times today bashing the president and just about everybody in the world is proof positive that what they have accomplished by changing, literally, this is a new paradigm, but that's what they need to keep saying. This is a magnificent victory. It may not be perfect, but it is truly remarkable. What's fascinating to me is that they took the debt ceiling and did something that nobody had ever done with it before. They attached substantive legislation. And all of a sudden, the Democrats, who love legislation on just about anything, thought this was just horrific. This was a crime against humanity to attach substantive legislation to the debt limit. But my favorite scene is Chuck Schumer whining, as he usually does, preposterously about attaching legislation to the debt ceiling. I mean, my day was made when Chuck Schumer was whining about that.
Yeah, wasn't the argument last year that just not enough legislation moves ever through Congress?
That is correct. They were called slovenly and not moving. Instead, they were doing a little more thinking.
All right. Hey, I wanted to ask you about this D.B. Cooper story. Does anybody still remember the old story about D.B. Cooper? Was a man who hijacked, I guess it was like 40 years ago, he hijacked a plane.
It was November the 24th, 1971.
Right. Yeah, in fact, I know that it tells you how long ago it was. They talk about how, the story starts by talking about him sitting in the front of the plane smoking a cigarette, So it was a long time ago.
Not only that, he asked the stewardess for a shot of whiskey, and he lit up a cigarette. Then he asked her to sit next to him for a moment, handed her a note that said that he had a bomb and he was going to blow up the plane unless they didn't do what he said. And then he got them to land. He let 36 people off the plane in exchange for $200,000. He had 4 parachutes with him. Now, I don't know how he got those on board without anybody asking questions. But at any rate, he jumped out of the plane after they took off. He told them to fly below 10,000 feet, jumped out of the plane with 2 parachutes, and was never heard from again.
Yeah, he got the money, and he left the plane, never been seen before. They did find, I guess about a year or 2 years ago, they found some of the money along a river in the Northwest where he bailed out, but they've never found him. Well, there's a new story that says that perhaps that the FBI has a lead on a suspect in this case.
Yeah, apparently someone who either knew him or thought he was D.B. Cooper gave some information to the Bureau, and apparently it also contained physical objects, because they are doing DNA comparisons with a tie that was left on the plane, the shot glass that was left on the plane, and some of the money that was the $5,800 that was recovered a few years ago. They're doing DNA and fingerprints, and in all likelihood, by the way, this is from a deceased person, because the Bureau would not be talking about this if he were alive.
See, this is one of those things for me where I don't want to at all endorse skyjacking or anything like that, but this is one of those things where it's like such a great American mystery that it almost would be a letdown for me to find out it's just some like guy who went on to live in Cleveland for a while. You know, it's just like, it's such a mysterious thing, and he just disappeared into the night, and there's something sort of, I don't know, such a great caper about it.
This was actually more of a 1960s story than a 1970s story, but in fact, it has been sort of in the FBI's craw all that time, and if they were able to solve it, it would be nice for them. But it's really more of historical interest than anything else.
Well, let me ask you real quick about this New York Times reporter. Federal judge ruled Friday New York Times reporter must testify at the trial of a former CIA officer charged with leaking classified information about Iran, but said, you know, the scope of what he could be asked to talk about would be small. What implications does this have?
Well, this is really fascinating. This is Jim Risen, who is a national security correspondent for the New York Times, who broke a lot of the big stories during the Bush administration, like the intercept of overseas telephone calls and data, which was a major blow to U.S. intelligence. That story was written. His case is fascinating because this administration, the left-wing Obama administration, loved by the press, has brought more leaked criminal prosecutions than the entire total of all previous presidents. And this, without a whimper from the press, the New York Times, the Washington Post, anybody. I mean, can you imagine if George Bush had brought these cases, there would have been marchings in the street. And so here sits Jim Risen, a New York Times reporter and book author, sitting in a courtroom. He's going to be forced to testify, but the judge, Leonie Brinkema in the Eastern District of Maryland.
I remember her, yeah.
She has limited the cross-examination of the government as to what, and will not allow them to ask him about his sources. This, for the press, is a grand victory because they've gotten in this judicial ruling what they've been unable to get out of Congress, which is a federal shield law to protect reporters from questions like this. It remains to be seen. The government may appeal that decision to the Fourth Circuit. I expect that they will, and try to get the ability to cross-examine him about his source.
You know, Joe, we just have a moment or two left, but I seem to recall there's been like a number of stories of late where federal prosecutors have been sort of called on the carpet for sort of their excesses and pursuing certain people. What's going on with all that?
Well, at the beginning of this administration, as you recall, one of the first things that Eric Holder did was dismiss the case against Senator Ted Stevens because of outrageous prosecutorial conduct in the public integrity section of justice. They then sent a major message, along with a trip by the AG all around the country, for people to clean up their act. And what's been happening is the federal judges who've been watching the federal prosecutors around the country disobey discovery rules, turning over evidence of innocence, et cetera, have gotten very tired, and the Department of Justice has slowly developed a reputation for unfairness and overreaching. This is a very bad place for the Justice Department to be. Right. Judges have awakened from a slumber of basically doing whatever the government wanted into now becoming excessively concerned about dishonesty on the part of the government, overreaching, and not obeying the rules of the game. This is a big deal and a big development.
All right, we got to run, Joe. Thank you so much. Joe DiGenova, always good to have you here on the Morning Majority.
Great to be with you guys.